Sorry, I've not had an opportunity to get in my emails at all.
Okay, long or the short of it, she'll need to
is now live for you, Chair.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the meeting of the North East Derbyshire District Council Cabinet. It's 4:30 on the 10th of September. We'll get straight on with the agenda. First, we have apologies for absence. Do we have any?
None received, Chair, although Councillor Hutchinson would have liked to attend for the item on the overview and scrutiny work programme, but is unable to attend today.
No problem. Okay, well, if we could note Councillor Hutchinson's apologies for that then. Next item is declarations of interest. I think the only to declare is probably for myself and Councillor Cupit for the area housing offices paper, paper 7 on the agenda. We were obviously members of the board at Ricknell at the time at which they initiated that proposal and that consultation. So I think it's best that we don't participate or vote in that discussion because we've already approved it from a board perspective. Okay, any other declarations of interest from anyone? None
received, Chair.
Charlotte?
Just to clarify on that, Chair, do we need to leave the meeting for that item, or are we remaining in the meeting? Might be a question for Sarah.
Sarah, could you advise?
If you were physically in the meeting, you would be asked to leave the chamber. So I don't know, Nikki, if we can arrange for Councillor Dale and Councillor Cupit to leave and then return for the next item.
Well, I can pop them in the waiting room. So that's Councillor Dale and Councillor Cupit leaving for which item of business? Apologies.
Item 7, which is the area housing office consultation.
No, at that point, I'll pop you into the waiting room.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nikki. Okay. Okay, so that confirms declaration of interest. And the next item is minutes of the last meeting held on the 20th of August. I'll go through them page by page. Please shout out if there's any issues of accuracy. Anything on page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, or page 5. If not, are we happy to approve as a true and accurate record? Yeah, can you raise hands? Thank you. Brilliant. Okay. And then we come to the proposed overview and scrutiny work programmes. Is it best to hand over to you, Sue, to talk through that paper?
It is. Thank you very much. Yes, thank you. This is the usual work programme report that comes to Cabinet every year. You'll be aware that scrutiny is required to keep Cabinet informed of the work that we're proposing to do during the year. There's nothing unusual on it. It's 2 strands of work chiefly, which is the review reports, which are set out in 1.5 of the report, and then the usual overview of policies and services. We try to concentrate on the key policies, strategies, because obviously there's so many we couldn't look at them all, and also look at services perhaps where there's an issue or we've been asked to do some review work. I'd just say it's a live document, it's not set in stone, it can be changed. We try to leave some capacity for urgent or emerging issues if we need to look at items. So there's nothing further I need to say, Chair, unless you have any questions on what's on there. Okay, thanks, Sue. Yeah, it looks like a busy programme of work for the next year, and obviously some interesting topics that I can see the committees are looking at there. Are there any other comments or questions from members? Anything anyone wants to make clear? No. Okay, thank you for that. Are we all happy to? We're being asked to support the attached overview and scrutiny work programmes for 2021. I'll move that. Is there a seconder? Councillor Parkin, and all those in favour? I think that's carried. Thank you. And then we come to the reviews of, or one of the reviews of last year's scrutiny reviews, which is the residential parking review, and I'll hand over to Councillor Kevin Tate to talk us through this one.
Hi, thank you, Alex. So last year we met 6 times. We were given the instruction by council to consider provision for parking within the district. So during those 6 meetings we met, through various policies that we hold. We met various stakeholders, spoke to Ricknold, spoke to 4 parish councils as well. We had Claycross, Strongfield, Ecking, Killamarsh, and the overview of parking within the district was that there was many different problems within different areas, not one general problem within them all. So through that, we came up with the recommendations. Firstly, we considered, like dog fouling and potholes, for example, for a portal to be on the website so that people could report parking. We thought this was a good idea because it was a very easy thing to do, we considered, and it would be it would give us an overview within the district of where our key areas are that need to target. The other ones were to use Grasscrete. This is like a mesh, so like that can be used on verges, because when we spoke to various people, what was happening was people were parking on the verges anyway, and to avoid tarmacking over them, this seemed like an alternative to that. We also looked at planning with new applications. The minimum parking spaces you can put in your application is 1.5. So if you put an application in for planning or a development, you only have to allocate 1.5 spaces per dwelling. And we looked at that, and we considered that not a lot of people have 1.5 cars. So what was happening is it was impacting on the streets and affecting things like refuse collection, people double parking. So we looked to increase that to 2 as a minimum. Also looked at garage spaces, because garages are no longer really used, or not as much as they were, and they were generally quite small because cars were a lot smaller back then. So what's happening is they're getting left for storage, those kinds of things. So we looked at whether these could be used. If they're currently not in use, whether these could be used as a parking area just to take the overflow from the streets. And we looked at increasing the budget for enforcement. When we spoke to Killamarsh, I think it was, the main thing they were saying was enforcement, because their people know that it's not going to bad parking is not going to be enforced, and they were quite happy. People were happy to park on double yellows or double park, knowing that there was no repercussions for them because there was no enforcement. So those are the recommendations. I'm happy to take any questions.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Kevin. Yeah, I think this is a really useful, timely review. I think the recommendations are really useful. They're very simple things that I think, well, certainly some of them are very simple things that we could do quite quickly, hopefully, that would deliver some changes. So the website facility, I'm sure, is something that we could certainly look further at, and I think the issue of new developments in particular, I know you highlighted that, and refuse wagons. Charlotte and I were actually out with some of the street scene teams today, and even they brought up the fact that often new developments have very narrow streets, and very rarely do they have sufficient parking. So it is a real problem, getting up and down there. So I think that would be certainly something that we should very carefully consider and try and introduce if at all possible. The thing around the recommendation around review of garage sites, I know that Asset Management Group is already looking at some of those, so I think Council Parking should be able to update on that. And then the issue around enforcement and Grasscrete, I think we just need to look very carefully at in terms of the budget and whether we can do that. But I think if there is possibility of doing it and supporting or buying in some additional parking enforcement from the county in particular, that would be very, very, very good, and I think well received by a lot of residents who are experiencing problems. So thank you very much for your team and all the review, and Sue Bierman as well for the work on this, because it's a very useful review, and hopefully we can take forward quite a few, if not all of those recommendations. I'll bring Councillor Parkin in next.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd like to echo your comments. To be honest, I'm really happy with these 5 recommendations, and I think it'll be a matter of targeting where finance is available, the areas that we've seen most problems in. But having read through the report, I understand that DCC are actually the authority for enforcing the parking regulations. So I guess we need to have a conversation about how much it costs for enforcement officers and that as a result of this report. But thank you very much for bringing this report. It's excellent. And having had not a Grass Creek Drive, but a very similar parking area in my driveway for 12 years, I can certainly say that stuff works. So, so thank you very much. Yeah, that's me. My only question, I think, would be about the minimum standard for car parking spaces. I'm not questioning the recommendation. I think that's correct. I would just question whether you've had any feedback from developers about what impact that would have on them. And indeed, you had one on the panel, which was Ricknold, and I wondered whether Ricknold gave you any feedback on that 2 parking space recommendation.
Okay, I'll come back to you, Kevin, for that, and then I'll bring Mark in.
I think the simple answer is it didn't really make much comment on the 1.5 spaces. I'm not sure we got Ricknold in before or after. Sue might be able to jog my memory. I'm not sure if Ricknold came in before we looked at that or afterwards. So I don't think they gave any comment on it though, no.
I can't recall any comment, Chair, on that from Ricknold.
No.
Yeah, I think it's something that we'll probably need Charlotte to take away in terms of planning and whether it's possible, and what document it needs to be in that we create that sort of a protocol. So let's have a look and see what we can do with that. Mark, you want to go in?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. First of all, thank you, Councillor Tate, for the report. I'm going to agree and ask that we accept all these recommendations, which will be as no surprise because I was on communities when we looked at these, when we looked at residential parking. So I'd be happy to accept all the recommendations, but in particular, the one that interests me most of all is the second one, which is the increased civil enforcement. I think that's one that could make the biggest difference. And I wouldn't anticipate that it would cost too much. When you look at civil enforcement, yes, it's right that county are responsible for a fair amount of civil enforcement, but the district have done it before too. And if I remember right, the ones I've seen around were private enforcement officers employed by the county, and at the same time they also did district work and they had a Velcro badge. They were a private company in Nottingham, if I remember last. Somebody else might know better here, but that's the last I remember. So it would be about not paying, I think the recommendations we spoke about, we're not paying the county for their work, but would be to use the same people that they use and use them for a set number of hours. So it's not about creating employment. It's not about taking anybody on. It's about using those same private services and using them to enforce parking in areas that the district had an interest in. I don't know if I think that's what we agreed at the end of the study, and I'm sure that was in the recommendations. So it was to increase put money towards a budget to provide for enforcement in areas that were of particular interest. Now we know it's county that have got the responsibility for it, but there's areas that we could look at too. So I think that's what it was about. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, completely agree. I'll bring Carolyn in next.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Tate. I think all of us have car parking issues in that is one of our highest rates in terms of complaints locally. Quite frankly, in Eckington, it's become like the Wild West. And what's disappointing to me is that there's no enforcement. I've not seen any kind of enforcement in our parish for years. So personally, I would like firstly this to be fed back in quite strong terms to DCC in terms of how we can hold them to account for this. But if there is any opportunity to actually increase enforcement presence, and I don't know how you do that. I don't know what the rules and regulations are about enforcement, but I would certainly be very happy to support anything that would help set the scene. Because when you do actually have somebody who does actually start slapping tickets on cars, it doesn't take long for the message to get across an area that you can't park there any longer. And we've not had that for a long time, despite repeated requests to the police. They still haven't managed to do that. The only thing that I was going to question as well is that on my walk arounds with Ricknold, there are a lot of issues on some of the estates, some of our own estates. And it was about, there's been a reluctance to allow people to put cars in their front gardens. And I know there's a cost of that, but I've never got my head around what the cost to actually drop pavements and get residents actually want to put cars in their own drives, but at the moment they're prohibited putting them on. I'm just wondering if you have some clarity on that.
I seem to recall, Carolyn, on that we agreed a sort of standard spec and protocol for doing that fairly recently. It might have been actually before you came onto cabinet. It was within the past few months anyway. So I think we've agreed a process to allow people to do that, and what spec in terms of driveway we would allow. Obviously, for various reasons, we want to keep it to a specific spec so that it doesn't make the estates look untidy, etc. So I think we've gone forward with that, and that's now in place.
It was actually the cost, Councillor Dale, that I was interested. I think it was an assets it came up the spec. I've seen that. I've never got anybody to give me a cost.
Oh, okay.
To try and see if it works and if it's actively publicised to tenants who might or residents who might want to do that.
Okay, well, we can maybe ask Councillor Powell to take that up with Ricknold then, if that's possible, just to make sure that people are aware of the costs involved and what they would need to do to proceed with it, make sure it's well advertised. I'll hand over to Councillor Kenyon.
Yeah, yes, thank you. Yes, thank you, Councillor Tate, for the report. It's very good. I agree with all the recommendations there. Also, the priority that someone said about enforcement first, Killamarsh and Eckington definitely would benefit from that. But it's also the third one I'm particularly interested in, the grasscrete. It's a major issue on some of our narrower streets with these grass verges, and but we're going to have to be proactive about doing something about that. What I would hate to see is that recommendation sitting there. So somehow we need to, I don't know, put out a call for sites or call for problem areas again and make sure that we actually tackle them. Otherwise, nothing will happen and we'll be 3 years down the road. And so I'd like us to see a very strong action to set up a task force to progress that further.
Thanks, Councillor Kenyon. I was going to suggest actually, because I know from personal experience with grasscrete, trying to get it in a specific area in Dromfield, actually, Council Park will know, with the avenue where they have a lot of grass areas of the pavement sort of thing, where they get a heck of a lot of vehicles going over and churning it up. And I seem to recall the costs for grasscrete being quite prohibitive. It's not apparently the spec that county use, it's not that cheap. But I think the point that you make around a task force or a group to get going, I think I was going to add to the recommendations that we look to set up an early meeting with the relevant people at DCC to try and work through how we would progress some of these things, and really, particularly around the enforcement and the grasscrete side of things, how we can work with them to find solutions rather than find barriers, sort of thing. I think Councillor Rennick is next.
Yeah, no, just to add to that, Councillor Dale, is that I've had to pursue this as an issue in Ridgeway, And the official line from the council was that there's also flooding issues, and they were reluctant to do any of this.
Right. Okay. Okay. Well, Kevin, I'll come back to you, Councillor Tate.
Yeah, the thing with the grasscrete was it still allowed drainage.
Yeah.
So you weren't creating a wash-off area straight into the drains. It still managed to. I don't know what the sub-layers would be, but that's why it's on the recommendation, because we were conscious that we didn't just want to pave over vast areas of land. So that's why it's on.
Yeah, good point. I'll bring Lee Hicken in. I can see his hand raised.
Just a quick one. We've done some work recently around grasscrete versus traditional tarmac, and there's not a lot of difference in terms of cost. I'll just throw that one in there. Between tarmacing something and grasscreting it, the costs are about the same, but obviously you get the benefits with grasscrete that is permeable, it drains through, you've got the appearance of grass, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, well, let's see if we can investigate that further and find if there's another solution that might be slightly more economical than grasscrete. But anyway, we can explore that. So, are there any further comments before we move to the recommendations? No, thank you for that. Well, thank you again, Councillor Tate, and all of the committee. Councillor Foster as well, I know, was on this committee at the time of the review. So thank you for all the work on that. The office recommendations, as I say, are that Cabinet's asked to consider the recommendations and, if accepted, ask officers to provide a response in consultation with the relevant portfolio holder. But I think the recommendations cross a few portfolio holders. So I think it's in particular Councillor Cupit and Councillor Powell, and I think we also need to arrange an early meeting with DCC and the relevant person at DCC to discuss taking some of these further. So if we can task Councillor Cupit and Councillor Powell to spend a bit of time looking into some of these and how we proceed with them and get that meeting arranged with DCC, I'll happily assist if needs be in getting the right person. Then we can hopefully try and make some progress on them as soon as possible. Brilliant. Is everyone? I'll move that. Is there a seconder? Yeah, Councillor Foster, and then all those in favour. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay. Thanks, Kevin. You're very welcome to stay or depart if you'd like to. Thank you for that. And then the next item is the council plan targets performance update. So this is my paper, which I will move to shortly. If I can get my iPad to work. Bear with me. So this is the first quarter, so April to June, of our new council plan. So this is the council plan that we set as an administration. The report goes through in some detail the fact that COVID has clearly impacted on some of our performance. I think we have to remember that this is covering the period where COVID was most impacting us. It was the early period of lockdown where a lot of the council resource had to divert to more sort of emergency services and those sorts of things. So some of them, although they may seem like they could have been progressed further, I think it's largely because this period covers that initial period of lockdown when we were moving council resources around. I'll pick up on a few of them though. I think some of them it's quite clear we have been making progress on since this period. So in the second quarter, hopefully we'll be in better shape. And obviously there have been quite a few targets that have been achieved. So well done for those councillors and officers who've been working on those targets that have been achieved. There's one or two I did want to pick up though. So ECO 07, which was deliver 3 business engagement events annually. I think it refers in the report there to the fact that we could do those virtually, and I would like to try and see if we can get those moving forward as soon as possible. If not, appreciate COVID has impacted and businesses' focuses have been different. A lot of businesses haven't been open over the initial period of lockdown, so it's understandable. But I think if we are able to try and pick those up if they haven't already been. And then the same goes for some of the parish engagement. We do talk about attending so many parish council meetings per year and supporting parishes with various different things. I think on that, although I appreciate the resources intensive, I think it's probably never been easier to attend a parish council meeting because so many are over Zoom now or via virtual means. So if we are able to try and pick that back up and try and push that forward, I think that would be very useful. I won't go into it anymore. I think we're all aware of the targets that are sort of need a bit more work or that have been delayed by COVID, and we did have the performance target review a month or so ago. So we did go through some of these in quite some detail at the time, and I'm confident that obviously we will make further progress in the second quarter, given that obviously we've returned more back to normal since July than perhaps we did in the first quarter of the year. Any further comments or queries on that paper? Anything you want to add, Kath? And then I'll bring Councillor Rennick in. Kath?
No, not really. I think you made a valid point. Obviously, April to June is the period that's been most affected by COVID, and that shows through the targets, with about a third of them being affected by COVID. I agree. I think there will be more progress to report at Q2, and obviously we'll have the review. The mini review would have taken place by then, so it'll be a neater set of targets to discuss going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing to add is obviously that several of the economic development targets are under review anyway, because obviously Jill is new as a new director, and Carolyn is a relatively new cabinet member on that. So I think it's important that we do review those as is suggested by the paper. Over to you, Councillor Rennick.
Thank you, Councillor Dale. I was just going to say that we might want to look at some of our targets anyway. But just for the record, there has been quite a lot of business engagement, actually one-to-one throughout COVID, in terms of support for. So if we'd have had that as a target, we would have smashed it. So I think I know you can't go back and put it in, but it is worth noting. There was a lot of there's been a lot of one-to-one, and as councillors and cabinet members, we've all been speaking to businesses locally. And there's a few events that I'm piggybacking on, a tourism event in a couple of weeks that I'm speaking at with one of our partners. So we are doing business engagement, but in terms of doing it under our banner, I definitely think we could be doing more and should be doing more, and that will be built in.
Brilliant. Thanks, Councillor Rennick. I think that's a valid point, though, actually, and maybe that's more about how we record some of the progress against some of these targets, because you're absolutely right. In terms of the support, the business support that we've offered to many businesses around the district, we've done a heck of a lot of business engagement. It might not be an official event, but actually perhaps we can find a way of recording that into the system so that it's clear that albeit that specific target might not be met, we are making very, very clear progress towards it. Councillor Kenyon, I'll bring you in next.
Yes, thank you. Two questions. One question, one statement. Which target review process were you referring to when you said there'd been one a month ago? But my comment really is some of the targets, and it especially applies to economic development, but not everything is measurable, but it doesn't mean it's any less a target to try to improve it. And it would be a mistake to only have measurable targets in there, because they do really drive the attention of the officers to achieve the targets that they're given. And if there are things we want to achieve, for example, like increasing retention of graduates in the area, if it isn't a target, it will never get reviewed on a regular basis, and it will just get dropped. So just because a target isn't necessarily measurable in an objective way doesn't mean it shouldn't be there with a subjective attempt to gauge the progress, because they're really important things to achieve, some of them.
Absolutely, I wholeheartedly agree. I think quite often we have some very specific measurable targets that are kind of task and finish targets, where once you've done them, you can mark them off as complete, and actually they're not always the best targets to improve performance on. So I would agree. First question was that the meeting I was referring to was the quarterly performance management meeting, which I think all cabinet members get invited to. I can't remember whether you weren't able to make it at the time, Jeremy, but we should all be getting in the invites to those. So if we're not, can we just make sure that they are coming out? Councillor Kenyon?
Yes, that wasn't a review of what there's two kinds of review. There's progress on the targets we've got, but sorry, I misheard you maybe. I thought you were talking about the actual targets as to what they are being reviewed rather than progress on the existing targets.
No, I think the report refers to some of the economic development targets which are under review, which is a process that Carolyn and Jill are going through to review those. But sorry, the other thing I meant was I think the quarterly performance meeting. Just as an aside, though, I have asked that we for the next informal cabinet that we have this and the recovery plans. So both the council plan, the performance sort of targets that sit under it, and the recovery plans come back to the next informal cabinet. I'm not sure whether we'll get through all of them, but I would like to just review where we are with them and consider whether we want to make any changes at that stage, you know, or revise any of the actions and targets within it. So we'll get that opportunity in the next month or so. Any other questions or comments on that paper? I think we're being asked to note this one, so I'm happy to move the recommendations. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Powell, thank you. All those in favour? Brilliant, thank you very much. And then we move to the Area Housing Office consultation. So I'll hand over to Councillor Powell to lead us through on this one, and obviously Councillor Cupit and I will be put in the waiting room.
I'll do that for you now, Chair.
Right, well, hello everyone. The area housing consultation is something that we discussed over the summer. The background to this is that during the pandemic, the area housing offices were closed, and there was no significant problems that arose from that. So it seemed to be a sensible way forward to look at whether we actually needed the 4 area housing offices that are left, bearing in mind some have closed in previous years. If you look at the savings for closure, they are very significant and would make a huge contribution to our financial resource. The consultation was a very thorough one, involving all the people who actually use the offices that are left. And a huge and significant majority said they could use an alternative method. Amongst the mitigation for it is that in all cases, in all areas, there are at least 3 alternatives which people can use. And if people are in real difficulties, Ricknold would make special arrangements if that were necessary. So I'm happy to answer questions before making the recommendations. So I can't see anybody's hand up, so I would make the recommendation and that the cabinet, oh sorry, Carolyn. Carolyn.
No, sorry, I've lost you on screen, but thank you, very good report, and happy to agree with everything on that.
Thank you. In that case, can I move the recommendations then? The Cabinet notes I'm just looking for it, the Cabinet notes the feedback from the consultation and that it ratifies that we will permanently close the area housing offices. All those in favour?
Just quickly on this, Alan.
Yes, Mark.
I'm sorry to come late, Chair, on that. My apologies. Has this already been published, this paper?
Not publicly.
It's not publicly. Where it speaks on, I only got to the end there as we were speaking. Under human resources implications, 5.3.1. It says that at the end, and a redundancy process would follow at RHL. Yeah. Do we need any clarity on that? I mean, I wouldn't like anybody to be jumping at that and making it look like we're making people redundant. If we're making post-redundant, that's different. So making post-redundant and redeploying people, or whatever other method you look at, still keeping people on. So that's a concern that's there for me anyway, that basically any opposition would pick that up. So is there anything we can do there at all to, I know it's late, but to put some clarity between whether it's the posts that are being made redundant or the people that are being made redundant, and the redundancy process would follow, even that we said that there were going to be no compulsory redundancies. Is that a valid point, Alan?
Where people's jobs are concerned, it's always a valid point. But I am satisfied that the mitigation that Ricknold have put in place will not give us any problems whatsoever.
Councillor,
I've got Lorraine on the line as well. If you'd like to say anything, Lorraine Shaw from Ricknold.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Powell. Councillor Foster, we have had discussions with our staff that are part of this process, because they are all aware that the offices haven't been reopened. So we've been reassuring staff along the way and have had regular weekly meetings with them. They are very clear that it will be posts that are made redundant, and that we are looking at alternative redeployment options for them. We've had at least 9 members of our customer services team come forward and ask for their redundancy figures because they would choose to leave. And as a result of the increase in the jobs that we would have in our contact centre, because that's what we're planning to do, is to extend the front line in the contact centre, there won't be any need for compulsory redundancies at this stage. There will be voluntary, and we're quite confident that we'll be able to redeploy those staff where there are people that fall out of this process. Having said that, we have made it clear to our staff that, because we are looking at other areas of the business as well, not least our planning function, that there may be other redundancies that fall out of our restructuring, and that goes to our board next week. But we've carefully worked with and communicated with all staff during this last few months, and we've had no negative feedback from them at all. We've also kept in touch with unions to make sure that the union representatives are aware of the situation, and we will be meeting with them again next week with our staff, assuming the decision today is not to reopen the offices. Thank you.
Yes. Thanks for that, Lorraine. There's nothing I wouldn't expect anyway. I know you would have looked at it like that. I'm just wondering if I presented this at cabinet, at council, I'd expect that to be one of the first questions, and I would expect anyone questioning this to mix up the post redundancy and people being made redundant. That's what I would do if I was attacking this paper. So if the other side were minded to, that's what I'd expect. That's all. I wondered if we could put anything in there. If you're happy as it is, then I am too.
Oh, well, we have a recommendation which I have moved. Is there a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Parkin. All in favour? Thank you, that's carried. Nikki, could you ask Alex to return with Charlotte, please?
They're both returning to the meeting room now.
Hi all, thank you for that.
Just for your information, Chair, the recommendations were accepted by the Cabinet.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you for that. Just while I remember, there was a query that I had from Councillor Potts on that paper in relation to the cost of the lease of the Killermarsh building. Would it be you, Jill? Would you mind just contacting Councillor Mo? Actually, although I think might not be a good time at the moment because I know her mum's in hospital, but I think we need to contact someone from Killermarsh at some stage just to clarify that point, because I think there was no mention of cost of the cost of the lease there. Obviously, it's our own building, I think. So there was an issue there anyway. If you could look into that at some stage and speak to them about it, that'd be great. Thank you. Thanks, Jill. Okay, so we move on to item 8, which is the temporary amendments to the Statement of Community Involvement to enable public consultation on the local plan during the coronavirus pandemic, which is over to you, Charlotte.
Thank you, Chair. This is hopefully quite a short report. It's just to be really sort of crystal clear, it is not sort of launching into any next consultation on the local plan. That will be the subject of a future cabinet report and will be publicised and sort of fully advertised to residents. So this is solely to amend the way in which we carry out consultations. As we've said in previous press releases, for obvious reasons, we suspended the next or progress to the next consultation of the local plan due to COVID-19 in March through to June. And I think that was the right decision and was fully supported by the inspector. But this is now to look ahead, you know, sort of any further COVID issues allowing to, when we proceed to the next consultation, just to be able to sort of fully involve all residents as we promised to do. So the main two amendments proposed here are in terms of usually draft plans or the consultation documents would be available at the council building and at libraries, etc., which I know aren't all open at the moment. So the mitigation proposal we're proposing there is to do that via obviously website and documents, but also to anybody who needs it to post it out in full. And likewise, if anybody is shielding or, you know, for any other reason is unable to get access to the documents, we will also post all documentation out and make every effort to you know, make sure everything's available to all residents to be able to comment. I think it's all included, outlined in the recommendations. Just as a further point, I know that individual councillors and ward members will also be making representations and be keeping residents fully aware of what's happening and offering guidance to residents on the next consultation when that comes. And we don't have a date for that yet, just to be really clear on that. So pending any questions, can I move the recommendations in section 6, 6.1 and 6.2?
Okay, I'm happy to second the recommendations. Are there any questions or comments from anyone? No? Okay. I'll move to the vote then. All those in favour? Okay, thank you. That's carried. And then we move to the planning enforcement plan. So back to you, Councillor Cupit.
Thanks again, Chair. So this is one of the documents that was outlined in the council plan and in the council plan targets, which you were discussing earlier in your report. This was originally due to come to Cabinet and then Planning Committee in April, but again, due to COVID, was delayed. So we're now picking that up. I think we know as an administration and as a council, enforcement and particularly planning enforcement is a really important priority for us and a key aim. So this is the start of that process to really put that at the headline and sort of advertise to residents. So this is a draft enforcement plan which sets out what we can and can't do on enforcement. It sets out clear targets for responding to residents and keeping them updated, and it also sets out for the first time a way of monitoring performance via the planning committee and via councillors, so that we know what's happening with enforcement cases, because I know in the past, even myself as a ward member, you report things and you're not always quite sure what's happened or what action has been taken. So this is a very draft report, but I wanted to bring it to Cabinet at this stage. It is also with the comms team prior to sort of flash it up into a resident-friendly version and add some infographics, etc., for a sort of formal launch of it. So it's to ask Cabinet as part of this to approve this in principle as a sort of starting point, to then comms it up, so to speak, and finalise that, and then it will go to Planning Committee to be formally adopted, hopefully this month or maybe next month if it's not quite ready. So yeah, any questions?
Okay, again, I'm happy to second that one. Are there any questions on that? No. Okay, yeah, completely agree. I think if we can make it more customer friendly in terms of how it's presented, I think that would be very good. So, you know, to definitely support that recommendation. Okay, we'll move to the vote. All those in favour? Okay, that's carried. Thank you very much. And then I can get back to my agenda. we move to, I believe we move to urgent items. There are no urgent items that I wish to raise. And then we move to the exclusion of the press and public. So if you're joining us from the live stream or watching back from YouTube, thank you very much. I hope you found it useful and interesting. And goodbye. So thank you very much. I'll just move the item that the public be excluded from the meeting during the discussion of the following items of business to avoid the disclosure to them of the exempt information as defined in Part 1 of Schedule 12A to the Local Government Act 1972. So thank you very much. If we can end the live feed.